Hello everybody, welcome back to CIS 39. Today we are going to be covering our penultimate lesson, second to last lesson, number 19. So we're almost done here with this semester. We've almost made it out of the woods here in this adventure in online teaching out of nowhere. All right, so the first thing I want to mention is that the last lesson, 18, all you guys had to do is watch a video, but I also covered the final project in that video as well. And I had asked you guys to submit a Word document revising what was here under lesson 17 for the architectural proposal example. Now, 7 of you did do that. 3 of you did not turn anything in. So if you're one of the people that did not turn in a proposal to me, then I'd like you to go ahead and just use this proposal as your final project. Okay? All right. So today let's talk about lesson number 19. Today we're going to do a little bit of a light reading here through what is the concept of terrain and how that impacts what type of structures we might build. We're going to talk about organization of space and see how that's very, very closely related to the same ideas associated with creating a path. We're also going to see how organization of space relates back to order of form that we talked about way back when here on the introduction to architecture. So they're all related. Order of form, organization of space, and path, they're all very similar with respect to the concepts. And then last but not least, we'll talk about modularity, which is the concept that you can reuse items to create a sense of path and create a sense of organization of space, but we'll talk more about that in just a moment. So let's start off with terrain and space. All right, so terrain is something that when we think about it, um, there's something special about the place that you choose to place something. Otherwise, why did you bother to put anything there? Why did you decide to put a structure there? So the reading kind of starts off with this story of the founding of Rome and the brothers Romulus and Remus, and it talks about how Romulus saw 7 doves fly over the Capitol Hill, and he took this as a sign from heaven that that's where he should build what would eventually become the legendary city of Rome. All right, so he started off by just digging a simple shape of a circle, and he left it unfinished to suggest where a gate would go for people to enter into his grand city. So there he stood, very proud, declaring it the foundation of Rome, when his brother showed up. And what did his brother do? His brother stepped over the furrow rather than going into the opening that he left unfinished, that was supposed to be the gate to the new city. So what did Romulus do to his brother? He did what any brother would do. He killed him. Anyways, the point of the story and the sort of exaggerated drama of it is to again just reinforce that when you choose a place to put something, there should be something special about it. So whether it's like the Native Americans planting totem poles, right? Or whether it's the crusader planting the cross in the ground, or the Muslim who lays his rug on the ground to pray, they're all doing the same thing, that they are marking the place and they're announcing it to be holy and special. So that comes back to you guys and the choices you get to make with respect to your final project for your architecture. Where are you going to put that building? And what is the terrain going to imply about your structure? So let's go ahead and look through a few examples of terrain and think about what type of structures would make sense there. So again, you've all picked some type of structure. We'll see in the next class, not in this class, but in the next class we'll see how it's very, very easy to sculpt terrain and create paths in Mudbox. But we'll wait till the last lesson to do that. Again, today we're just trying to think about like what type of terrain do you want to put your building or your structure in. So let's talk about Arctic terrain. So what are some things that we would need to think about and consider if we were going to put a building up in an environment like this? Well, obviously it's going to be very cold. So heat is going to be an issue. We want to maintain and be able to build a structure that is able to retain heat. So in thinking about that, what are our orders of form? They're centralized, linear, and radial. So let's think about something like a radial order of form. We know a radial order of form has a centralized portion, and then it has linear segments that radiate out away from that centralized part. Well, if our goal is to maintain heat and keep it in one spot, that's probably not going to be a good choice for our structure in Arctic terrain. Probably going to look at something that's more like a centralized order of form. So recall, a centralized order of form is pretty uniform in terms of its scale along its height, width, and depth. All right, so probably going to go with something more like a centralized order of form. And then what else do we need to consider besides the temperature? We also need to consider like the snow. Snow is frozen water and has lots of weight, right? You guys didn't know that, right? Frozen snow is frozen water. You learn all sorts of things in Mr. Fast Class. But the reason I say that is because water is very heavy and ice is very heavy. So snow is also very heavy. So we're going to need to make something that is structurally very strong and able to hold up the weight of that snow. So what do we think about when we think about some of the past inventions that gave a structure strength? Well, let's think back to the Romans and the contribution they gave us, which is the arch. So recall back with the Colosseum that the arch distributed the weight down the sides into columns, and it also removed weight from the structure. And from the arch, we could then also get the vaulted ceiling, which is if you just simply extrude the arch. And then we also got the dome, which is if you took the arch and you revolve it in 360 degrees. Okay, so let's put those things all together. So we got a centralized order of form, we got domes, and does that sound familiar to you guys when we think about centralized forms? Yeah, we got that guy right there, right? Centralized. We got the arch, I'm sorry, not the arch, the dome ceiling, which is very strong. And so that's kind of why this architecture sort of naturally came out of, and in fact, in this case, literally came out of the environment in colder settings. Now, I want to be clear, I'm not suggesting that the only type of architecture that ever appears in Arctic or cold terrain is igloos, right? Clearly, that's not the case. I'm just simply trying to kind of motivate the idea or the logic behind why you would want to make certain choices based on the place that you choose to place your structure. Okay, so just want to put that out there that yeah, we see a lot of different types of architecture in cold terrain, but that's why we get that shape. Okay, let's go back to here. Okay, so let's move from one extreme to the other. Let's go from the extreme cold to the extreme heat. So if we're looking at desert terrain, what are some things we'd want to consider? So we kind of have the opposite thing going on here. Whereas in Arctic terrain, we want to maintain the heat. In a desert terrain, we want to let the heat out. We want to try to create lots of airflow and movement of air to help us try to keep ourselves nice and cool. So what type of order of form would we want with that? Well, if we think about radial orders of form or even linear orders of form, we could use those orders of form to sort of channel that airflow and move that airflow through our structure in a way to help try to keep it cool. So probably not really looking at a centralized order of form in this type of terrain. We could also create lots of openings in our structure, lots of windows. We could put lots of open space, like perhaps a central courtyard for us to sit in, and lots of shade via like canopies and things like that. All right, so those are some things you'd want to think about if you're going to go ahead and make a structure that's a good fit for desert terrain. Let's move along. Here's some crazy terrain, a jungle. All right, so what are some things we would want to think about with a jungle? So here, obviously, the reason we have all this vegetation is because we have a lot of precipitation or rain, right? So the ground is probably going to be very soft in an environment like this. It's also going to probably have a lot of unpleasant critters running around down here underneath all of this flora and fauna. So in this type of situation, we're probably looking at something like a raised platform, like we could place columns in the ground and then put like a deck on top of it so that we're avoiding contact with the surface of the ground, all right? So that's one of the things we want to think about here. Obviously, we also want some type of roof that is going to shed water away from our structure and keep it nice and dry as possible. All right. what about a forest? So in a forest, we have the same situation as a jungle, but just not as dense, right? So we have large open spaces of ground in a forest, but what are the things we'd want to consider? We have lots of nice open space, but we also have lots of friends running around in the forest as well. So lots of animals and potentially a safety issue as a result of those animals. So what types of order of form might make sense here? Well, a centralized might be the easiest order of form to protect, right? Everything is just going to be in one spot. It might be easy to assemble some type of fence or something like that around the structure to help protect us from the wildlife. We would also want to think about how the trees could be arranged in such a way or organized in such a way that it reinforces the space which we say is our special spot, our spot where we place our structure. So that could involve clearing trees out to imply where we should go. So if we think about like running a driveway up to our home, or if that's the type of structure you're building, again, you could clear out certain trees and that would invoke a sense of path, which we'll talk more about when we talk about modularity and path in the later slides. All right. Okay, not going to talk about urban because you guys are not creating a whole city, you're just creating a whole structure. And not going to talk about underwater. We're not making Bioshock, so no underwater stuff. And finally, nothing in outer space. None of you are going to make a project where you're making the International Space Station. All right, so don't worry about that stuff, and then don't worry about imaginary. All right, so that's terrain. That's everything we want to think about with terrain. Let's talk about, so again, before I get into a spatial organization, just think about that because next lesson I'm going to show you guys how to paint terrain. So just think about what type of terrain you want to put your structure in. Okay, so let's talk about spatial organization. Spatial organization refers to how you place other stuff around your building or structure. All right, so how can we organize stuff in such a way that it does the same thing as the ideas behind all the different shapes? How can we place stuff around our structure so that it reinforces the narrative or the function of our structure? Now, there are 4 different organizations of space, 3 of which are very similar in terms of the concepts associated with the orders of form. So we have a centralized order of form, we have a centralized organization of space. So what does a centralized organization of space look like? Something like this. So we have this large opening. This happens to be in front of the Vatican in Rome, the home of the Catholic Church. And this is a centralized, here in the middle, a centralized organization of space, not to be confused with the centralized order of form, right? So right off the bat, notice that an order of form is the actual substance. It's the actual object versus an organization of space, which is the negative space, right? So the organization of space is defined by the things around it, not by the actual space itself, right? Okay, so this is something called a piazza. A piazza is a large open space where that accommodates large gatherings of people. And the Vatican often has, well, not often, the Vatican has to do that. Not only do they get a lot of visitors, but every time they go to elect a new pope, like literally thousands of people gather here to see who the next pope is going to be. All right. Now I'm going to get a little bit ahead of myself. So you can also notice here this large road that leads to the centralized space. This is a linear organization of space. And since I'm mentioning it, let's go ahead and just drop down here and talk about linear organizations of space. So when we think about a linear organization of space, we think about a pilgrimage. So what is a pilgrimage? It's what these people are doing. They're just walking along a path, all moving towards a common goal, a common place. So let's go ahead and just pop back up here for a moment and kind of see why these spaces are laid out the way that they're laid out. All right, you have to sort of imagine yourself starting off down here at the beginning of the road, right? So the pilgrimage is down towards the Vatican, right? So what do we see in front of the Vatican? We have this large spire placed in the center of the centralized organization of space. And that's going to be sort of your, think of that as your beacon. So you are down here, your goal is to make it down here, and this is your beacon right dead center at the middle of that linear organization of space telling you, hey, look, this is where you're supposed to go. Come right down here, guys. Now, not only does this spire mark the middle of the centralized organization of space, it also draws the eye up, as most columns do in architecture. And we can see down here these statues. These are all placed along the top of the Vatican. And for those of you who don't know, these statues are all patron saints of the church. All right, so special individuals that have been canonized and made into patron saints of the Catholic Church. So not only is a visitor to the Vatican go on this pilgrimage down this road, they have the experience of having that column or spire draw the eye up, and we see all these individuals who are special to the church, right? So that's why the choice of linear and centralized organizations of spaces were chosen. And again, notice that with a linear organization of space, it's not about the actual space itself so much as it is about the things around it that define that space, right? Okay, now down here in this other example, this is another linear organization of space. Notice how as you make your way down the path, that the same concept is being used here as with the spire in the middle of the piazza. So we have this tower placed here at the end of the road, and it serves that same function of sort of drawing the eye up as you make your way down the road, and that same function of sort of serving as a beacon, like, hey, look, this is where you're supposed to go on your pilgrimage. All right, so those are some things to consider when choosing a centralized versus a linear organization of space. Now, radial organizations of space, I believe, I don't think, let me double check something real quick. Oh, that's right, that's right, that's right. So the only difference between a radial organization of space and a radial order of form is that with a radial order of form, you have the centralized part and you have the linear parts that come off of it, whereas in a radial organization of space, you want to think of it more as a network. So if you think about it, looking at a city from the top down, you're going to have roads that come together, they connect, they form intersections at various locations. So it's not like there's one centralized part to it, like this intersection down here, and then linear parts that come off of it. There's going to be a whole network or series of these intersections that connect to form the radial organization of space. So depending on what you choose for your final project, you're going to have, you'll see, let me jump over here to the website, that I did provide some, it's not the right one, I did provide some files in here that contain pre-built structures, and you can sort of place those around your structure depending on if you wanted it to have a linear, centralized, or radial organization of space for your final project. All right, so you don't need to make, I don't expect you guys to go in and make like an entire city, right? Just your building, and then you can go on the internet and find models or use models from these two files to create your organization of space. Okay, and then grid organization of space. In a grid organization of space, that's really a result of the need to scale your your structures to be either bigger or smaller. So let me give you guys an idea what it's talking about. So this is an example of a grid, of London. Now, just to kind of give you some insight, um, London was founded by the Romans, or I should say the city of London was founded by the Romans thousands of years ago, and it was originally a military barracks. And the city just sort of grew from that military barracks, which was located here around the Tower of, you can see the Tower of London, there's the Tower of London. It sort of grew up around that. And you'll notice that as we zoom out, if you look at the layout of the spaces, it's like almost like a spider web, right? I mean, look at how chaotic everything is laid out in London, right? And that's because, like I said, it was founded by the Romans thousands of years ago. Nobody knew that, flash forward a couple thousand years, that there's going to be a city with a population of several million people in it that need to figure out how to get around, right? So again, it's just kind of helter-skelter. Everything's kind of scattered. There's no organization to it. And that can make it very difficult to scale out and make things bigger. So the result, flash forward a couple thousand years. So this is going to be the city of New York, Manhattan. Notice how the stark contrast in the way that the spaces are laid out. Everything is very, very neatly laid out in this grid pattern, and that's what a grid organization of space is. And the idea is that should the need arise, you can easily combine these spaces together to make larger spaces. Sort of like we see here on the other side, we see that these are longer, rectangular, and that these have sort of been subdivided in half. So again, if we needed to scale down, we could do the same thing. We could go ahead and just separate these spaces out and then do whatever it is that we need to do with it, right? All right, so that's a grid organization of space. It's very easy to scale. And we'll see in just a moment that when we talk about paths, it's this exact, not similar, it's the exact same idea. You can almost just mention both things at the same time. All right, so there's your grid organization of space. All right, so that's terrain and organization of space. Let's go ahead and talk about modularity and paths. All right, so paths. Paths are all about movement. Paths are the way that you get to a structure or get from one structure to a different structure, right? So like in the examples we just looked at, we were looking at streets, right? But it doesn't always have to be something as large as a vehicle that's moving around. It could just be a path for a person to walk along, like a sidewalk or like a jogging path through a forest. All right, but again, the main idea here is that we're thinking about is movement. How do we get to our structure? All right. So notice here that we have a very strong sense of where we're supposed to go because there's obviously a big road here. But imagine I photoshopped this road out and just left it dirt. It would still feel like that was the place that you were supposed to go. It would still be defined by these bushes here off to the right, these trees here off to the left, that's telling us or implying to us where we're supposed to go. All right? And we do that with something called modularity, and we'll talk about that in just a second. All right, so what are some of the different ways that we can connect things together via a path? Well, really, we only need to think about two things. We're either going to have a horizontal surface where it's easy to define a path, or we might have something more complex like this, where the path is trying to accommodate an elevation change. We're trying to go from a low place to a high place, or a high place to a low place. So how do we accomplish that? All right, so this is going to be our first example of a path. So we have really just two choices here. We could either do it in one straight shot, right? We could just put a staircase that is linear, that just starts down here at the bottom and then is just a straight shot all the way up the hill. That's probably not going to be a great choice for a lot of reasons, especially in this terrain. Number one, it's going to be extremely steep and very strenuous for somebody to be able to use it, right? So this is an example of a winding path. So what the winding path does is it curves, like obviously as you see here, in something called a switchback, and it just makes it so that that change in elevation has now become very gradual as you make your way from the top to the bottom or vice versa. The other thing is that it allows us to have a nice view out, in this case, into the ocean, right? So we can kind of slowly make our way down into the beach down here. Okay, so that's an example of an elevation change. Now I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead a little bit. I don't know why this handout separated it out this way, but here's another example of an elevation change. And this is another type of path you could use. This is a spiral path, right? So just know that for the quiz exam, that there's really only three ways that you can tackle the elevation change. You can do it linearly, you can use a winding path, or you can use a spiral path to get from one elevation to the next. Okay, let's go back. Back. Okay. All right. Now, this brings us to the concept of modularity. All right, so what is modularity? Something that is modular is something that is pre-built and that can be arranged based on the plans for the structure. So think about like a door. If I'm going to go put up a building, I'm not going to have a custom door for every single place where I have a door, right? You go to Home Depot and there's 50 doors that are all pre-built and all look exactly the same, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, if every single window and door in your house was custom, it would just be impractical. It would take forever to get it done. It would be very expensive. And so that's the idea of modularity, is that you have something that is pre-built and available to you that you can arrange and place as you need. All right. Now, earlier when we looked at the first path through the forest, I mentioned the trees. Now, uh, the trees serve the same function in this picture as the columns, right? So the columns and the trees are just placed in such a way as to define whether it is a centralized or linear or radial organization of space. So it doesn't have to necessarily be other structures like we saw in the other pictures when it talked about like the grid space and we're looking at London versus New York. It doesn't have to be buildings, right? So we can create a grid space using just something like columns, right? And it doesn't have to be a grid. We can create any of the organizations of space: centralized, linear, radial, grid. We can create any of those four using modular pieces like columns or trees, like we saw in the other example. Other types of modular pieces. We could have things like statues, the lampposts, these columns that run along the length of the ground. Those are all modular pieces that are used to evoke a sense of path and a linear organization of space. In this case, the pilgrimage towards this castle. Now, the other thing worth mentioning is repetition, rhythm, or tempo. And how, and I don't know why, okay, and how the rhythm and the tempo is affected based on the frequency of the modular component. So let's go ahead and think about what's going on here. So this is a bridge, actually. You can't see that, but it is. And what is the function of the bridge? Well, obviously to get a person from one side to the other. What is the secondary function of the bridge? Keep the person safe, right? So notice that the frequency of the columns near the bottom is higher than the frequency of the statues along the top. Why is that? Well, the more frequent you place something, the higher the tempo, and the result is a higher sense of awareness or energy and a higher sense of tension, right? So high frequency, higher tempo, higher tension, higher energy level, heightened awareness, right? Those are all kind of the result of that. So why is that? Well, because we don't want the person to fall off the bridge, right? So we're trying to kind of create that heightened sense of tempo or energy here along the bottom. Now, as a design choice, we have the statues on the top, which are very elegant, very appealing. And notice that we're kind of slowing things down now. So we're spacing them out, lowering the tempo, creating a much more sense of calm to sort of counterbalance that higher energy of the columns at the bottom. All right. So to summarize, your choice of your spacing or tempo is going to affect sort of the overall energy of the space that you're trying to define. Right? So it may be that you want to have a high energy, high tempo, high intensity, or it might be that you want more of a calm space. So that would just determine your frequency. Okay, same thing going on here. We got a lower tempo down here at the bottom and a higher tempo here at the top, or higher frequency as the person walks down this pilgrimage. And again, it's a design choice, right? So in this case, the heightened sense of energy may be because it's just, again, offsetting the lower energy down here, right? It's, again, there's no right or wrong way to do it. There's no way that you shouldn't always have high frequency, low frequency. It's just it's a total design choice. It just depends on what the function of your space is. All right, radial paths. I'm not going to talk about. It's the exact same idea as a radial organization of space. And we already talked about how spiral paths can be used. All right, and then finally, grid paths. Grid path is the exact same concept as a grid organization of space. It's just on a different scale. So for example, if we think about Manhattan, we're talking about buildings. If we're talking about paths, it could be something like a swap meet, right? So if we're looking from the top down, this is arrange. Oh, hey guys, look at that, 30% off. So if we're talking about a grid path, it's the same idea. So we are trying to accommodate the circulation and flow of people. We can combine these spaces together to make large spaces. We can separate or break them down to create smaller places. So if you chose a marketplace for your final project, that's something you'd want to think about. All right. So it's the same idea, is that grid paths allow us to scale up and scale down very easily. And I think that's it for all of the handouts today. If there's anything else in here, yeah, like a network path. Okay, don't worry about it. I'm not going to ask anything about that for the. Oh, I'm sorry. There is one more thing, one last thing. But yeah, I'm not going to ask about that. Okay, last but not least, when we're talking about paths, we're going to have to give special consideration to the entrance of your building, right? It's the introduction between the person traveling to your structure and the structure itself. So we want to think about how we can arrange or design our approach to our structure in such a way that it again facilitates the narrative of our structure. So here's an entrance, for example, to the Griffith Observatory. Down here, here's a little fancier one. This is an opera house. So again, notice the difference between the different entrances. All right. So like with the observatory, we're not talking about necessarily, you know, hundreds of people coming at once, right? Smaller crowds, still going to have a large open space because you're accommodating a lot of people, but compared to something like the Opera House here, which is going to have larger crowds, we then have, as our entrance, we have a larger space. All right, same idea with the Vatican, right? We're going to have thousands of people going to the Vatican, so we have a larger piazza in front of it. Okay, so nothing too fancy to say there. It's just that when you're designing your path that leads towards your building, you want to create that sense of invitation, right? Unless you chose for your final project a dungeon or something like that, right? You might have something more ominous. Okay, and then that is it for paths. So don't worry about the stuff down here that it mentions about circulation, and don't worry about the stuff it says here about stairs and ramps. And I think that's it for the handout. Okay. All right, guys. So do go back and read through all the stuff that I highlighted just to make sure that you know it for the exam, and think about those things. So think about what type of organization of space you want for your final project. Think about what type of terrain you want in it, and think about what type of modular pieces you would want to add to it to reinforce that organization of space or path. All right, so let's do a working example of just that using the files that I provided here on the class website. So the next thing you're going to do is these are the handouts that I just covered, the terrain and the modularity. Next, you're going to need to download and open up this tutorial right here on the Wild West town. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start up Maya. Okay, so here we are back in Maya. Let's go ahead and make a new project. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and put this on my desktop. And I'm going to call this the Wild West project. All right. Next, I'm going to go ahead and go back to the class website, and I'm going to download this wildwest.zip file, and I'm going to save that into my project scenes folder. And that's going to have all the models that we're going to be working around today. Wild West. The computer's being slow as usual. That's my goal for the summer break, to get a new computer. All right, download it. Okay, next I'm going to go ahead and look for my Wild West scene. And go in here into my scenes folder that I downloaded that file into and extract all these files out of the zip. So I'm going to press Control A to select them all and then extract. All right, don't need that anymore. Okay, so let's go ahead and then open up the first file that we're going to use, which is the Main Street file. Okay, now I have the tutorial closed right now, but what the tutorial does is it basically goes through sort of this narrative of why the Wild West town is sort of arranged the way that it is, and I'm just going to go ahead and kind of like be your narrator as we go through it. Okay, it looks like I got an extra outliner, so I'm going to close that. All right, so here's our file. Really, computer? Why are you so laggy? I really hope that this doesn't... might have to make 2 videos here because I looks like I need to restart. In the past, when it does this to me, I have to restart the computer so that it goes faster. I don't want to do that though because this video is already 34 minutes long. Let me see. Let me try closing some stuff down here. I'm going to pause for just a second. Okay, I just tried closing some things down, but it looks like it's the recording software because every time I pause it, it's fine. All right, I'm just going to do the best I can here, you guys. All right, so here's our Wild West town. What we see here is shops and businesses, and the idea is that the town is going to sort of grow over time here. So all we're going to do is import a bunch of stuff into our scene. All right, so we have some shops. We're going to assume that it may in the future be the case that people want to stay overnight. So we're going to go ahead and grow our little town here. And also notice that we're using a linear organization of space for the shops, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and build by going to File and then Import. Let's build a place for people to stay. So we're going to import a hotel. And that's probably going to make sense to have that right down here at the end, just outside of all of our shops. All right, but if we're going to have a place for people to stay, we're also probably going to want to have a place where people can do something overnight while the shops are closed. So we're going to go ahead and build ourselves a saloon for the people to go hang out at when they're not shopping during the day. So let's go ahead and build a saloon. All right, so there we go, right down here at the end, opposite end of the hotel, right? Okay, computer is so slow. Okay, so if we have a saloon, we have the potential for things to get a little rowdy. Looks like something happened down here, right? We've got a card game and one chair is tipped over. We'll leave it up to your imagination what actually happened here, right? So if things are going to get a little bit rowdy, it means we're probably going to also need to have some form of policing or law enforcement. So where are we going to place our sheriff's office? Let's see, what would make sense? So go to import, and we're going to import the sheriff's office, and it's going to go, bam, right across from the saloon. Right, so any troubles caused over here, you end up right over here on the other side of the street in the old sheriff's office. All right. Okay, so our city has grown, so it's probably going to be the case that we're going to probably have some homesteaders or people that stay here permanently at this point. So let's go ahead and import once again. Notice how easy this tutorial is, by the way. We're just importing stuff. It's harder for me to have to tell the story of the town than it will be for you guys. All right, so there's a homestead. Okay, import. All right, so obviously we're going to have put our homestead sort of offset from the main town, right? We want to be able to sort of get away from things when we go back home to not feel like we're still at work. Okay, so now we're establishing more of a permanence to our town. That means we're also going to probably have kids growing up there, so we're going to have some place where we can do some schooling and things like that. So let's go ahead and build one last structure, import. Let's build a church. And that is going to get placed right down here. So remember, linear spaces, that sort of sense of pilgrimage, all right? So we put our, and also the idea of the spire or the beacon that kind of gives you the idea that, hey, this is where you're supposed to go, look up here, right? So that's literally all we had to do to create all this stuff, is just import it all. Okay, now we are going to go ahead and build some stuff, and I hope my computer is semi-functional here. Now the good news is that the stuff you got to build is really easy. Let me go ahead and open up the handout, the tutorial one more time. Okay, this is the tutorial for the Wild Wild West. It's worth noting that you don't need to do these steps up here for the preferences and all that stuff. You can just do like I demonstrated in the video. Okay, and I think my computer is so slow I might not be able to unfortunately demonstrate all the stuff in here. But it's okay. All right, so this is the last thing we did is we imported the church model into the scene. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a centralized organization of space, and you're going to create that centralized organization of space around these chairs for our old cowboys to come out here and hang out in and feel like they're sort of in like a patio type area. Now, building the fence is incredibly simple, you guys. I'm going to try to do it right now. It's probably not going to work out too well, though. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and create Polygon Primitive cube. Okay, and try to zoom out. There it is over there. It's going to end up in the middle of my town. Just going to press W and then try to drag this down. Oh my goodness, down here. Okay, this is not going to play nice with me right now, you guys. All right, so unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to demonstrate that, but the good news is that this is really easy to make. All that's been done here, let me see, there's pictures that zoomed in on it. Yeah, here. I mean, all you're doing is you're going to make a cube, scale it, and then duplicate it a bunch of times. And then just rotate it for these pieces right here, okay? And once you're done duplicating and rotating everything around, you're just going to highlight everything and combine it all into one piece. And then once you have one piece, one fence piece, you can and you've combined it, you should then go into Edit, Delete All by Type History, and then you can duplicate this entire segment to form the rest of the pieces of the fence, right? So you just make this one and then duplicate to make the rest of the fence, okay? So hopefully that's not too hard. Okay, next for the tree. For this, these directions are no longer good, but I did update on the website on what you're supposed to do to get the paint effects brush. So you're going to use the paint effects brush to quickly create a model of a tree. And as you'll see that there's actually a lot more than just trees that you can make using the paint effects tool. So to get the paint effects tool, you're going to go to Window, and then under Modeling Editors, go to Paint Effects. Oh my goodness. Oh, did it not? Is it right there? Nope, it's just really slow. Okay, next you're going to go to Brush and then Get Brush. That should bring this pop-up over here. Okay, we don't need this window anymore, so I'm going to go ahead and close it. And try to drag this out. Okay, in here, under Paint Effects, you have all kinds of different objects that can be instantly created for you. And so we talked about organization of space and modularity. There's all kinds of different stuff in here you could potentially use as your modular component. The one that we're going to use is here under Tree Mesh. And again, this is different than the book, I believe. And then you're going to use the one right here that's called Oak Autumn. All right. Once you have selected those, you're going to press Control and B for boy. That's going to open up the paintbrush settings, and you're going to need to increase the size of the tree up to 125. You can close that. Now what's going to happen is anywhere I drag on the ground, it's going to instantly create a tree for me, like so. Oh my goodness, come on. There we go. All right. I'm not going to even try to zoom in on it or anything like that. My computer's just way too slow. I think I just killed it with the tree because the tree has this like super high polygon count. And that's the next thing we're going to do. Let me try to just push F. We'll frame it. There we go. Okay, so this is a paint effect. You can actually see down here it says stroke, autumn, curve, autumn. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to convert that into a polygon mesh. And this is not something that's in the handout, but you do want to do. You're going to go to Modify, and then Convert, and then choose from Paint Effect to Polygon. And then I'm going to pause it. Okay, And there, it's all done. Okay, so you can see what it does is create this new group down here. Let me choose the selection tool. And that our tree now has two pieces to it. It has the trunk and it has all the leaves. And what we can do is we can simplify the polygon count on this thing so that it doesn't bog down our scene by going to modeling and then choose mesh and then choose reduce. And then I set it to like 20% and then I just hit apply. Hopefully this doesn't take forever. Did it finish? Yeah, it did. Okay. You don't need that guy right there. All right, so then let's try applying it again. And what's it saying? Main, apply. And you just want to reduce it until you get like a warping in it, right? Okay. And then same thing for the leaves. All right. Anyways, so just go ahead and do that to your tree just to simplify it so that it's not such a high polygon count. Okay, and then again, my computer is really, really slow, so I'm just going to show you over here because I think you guys got it from here. Let me see. Yeah, that's the other thing that's an issue. So when you go to move the tree around, the pivot will be way out here for some reason. So to get this pivot on top of the tree, you're going to want to go to Modify and then Center Pivot. Why don't I see it? There it is. Modify Center Pivot, and that'll move it so that the handle's right on top of your tree. Okay, next we're just going to duplicate it by hitting Control D and then put it wherever you need it. All right. Okay, you can also play around with the scale. You can scale the tree up or down. You can also do some fun stuff like potentially get rid of like the leaves on it so that it's like a tree that has no leaves, right? Let's go back over here. Okay. So I'm not going to demonstrate it because my computer's so slow. But you're going to put a tree here, give the cowboys some shade as they're rooting and tooting and shooting. And then down here, they just show you can get rid of the leaves. And then it shows you here's some good places, some good spots to place your trees. Here's a dead tree right here. Oops, a dead tree right here. There's some dead trees out here. You can't see it. There's a cemetery there by the church. All right, and then again, these are this is the concept of modularity. So we're just using the trees to reinforce this centralized order of space here in front of the homestead. So remember we had like the centralized order of space in front of the opera house or the observatory. Same thing here, centralized order of space. Here we're using the fence as the modular pieces to reinforce the modular, the centralized order of space. The tree is just sort of marking the center, kind of like the idea of the spire in the front of the Vatican. And then the next thing we're going to have to do is add a path. Okay, so we're tying it all in. So there's our linear organization of space. This is now going to be our linear path. And this is very simply created by creating a plane and then extruding the edges of it. And let's see if we can get the computer to do that. And then that'll be pretty much it for today's lesson, which is much longer than I thought it would actually be, probably because of all the stupid lagginess of my computer. All right, so we're going to go ahead and create a polygon plane. Create polygon plane. All right, I'm going to hit F to, actually, let's bring it down here. I don't know if I mentioned this in the previous tutorials, but my computer is a laptop that I got 10 years ago, so that's not helping the situation either. All right, so all I did is bring this down here. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and select the edge. Actually, I'm going to scale it. I'm going to try to scale it at least. That's good enough, fine. And then I'm going to go ahead and right click, and I know you can't see the menu, but I'm choosing edge. And I'm going to choose the edge. And then I'm going to use the shortcut here to extrude. God. All right, and then last but not least, if it finishes rotating, you're going to select the handle for it and then just pull that out to get your next section. You can also use the red handles, like that one, to scale it out, to change the size of it. Okay, so using just those techniques, selecting the edge, extruding it, and then translating it and scaling it, you're going to, he starts off with just this, and then eventually he just goes through edge by edge and kind of makes it a little bit more like organic looking, like so. And then the very last thing you're going to do is you're going to duplicate some more trees to place along this linear path, like so, to just, again, reinforce the path. And it's kind of interesting, he chose a pretty high frequency for the trees, which makes it a little bit more intense than if you knocked a few of them out. And that's it. That's the lab for today. It's actually incredibly easy. This one usually everybody finishes before the end of class. Okay? All right, as usual, when you're all done, you want to make sure to zip all your files up into the project folder by clicking on Send To, and then send that sucker to a compressed zip folder. All right, you guys. So that is it for lesson number 19. One more to go, you guys. We're almost through the woods here on this crazy pandemic that has now turned into people rioting as well. So I hope you guys are safe. I miss seeing you guys, miss talking to you guys about whatever's going on with your projects and stuff like that. And good luck on your work here. Hopefully everybody's getting started on their final project. I didn't say this explicitly, but the final projects will be due at the end of finals week. I will send that out an announcement later as well, though. So hopefully you'll be able to get all that done within the next couple of weeks or so.